ST 2016. This is interviews, music reviews, and more. This is The Hodder Show.
What is up, everybody? We are rolling audio here today on episode 316 of The Hodder Show. I hope you guys are doing absolutely fantastic. Thank you so very much for tuning in and clicking that play button on today's episode of the podcast, the final episode of 2021 here for The Hodder Show. I hope you guys are ready to ring in the new year. I know I am. We're going to have some fun here today on the final episode of 2021, and it has become a bit of a tradition here on The Hodder Show to do a year retrospective with my man Josh Colville from Still Loading Podcast. And this year is no exception. I was actually on his show last week for this very conversation with an added bonus of us doing a review of the Super Mario Bros. World cartoon, a cave Christmas or something of that nature. I can't remember the name off the top of my head right now. A cave, the night before Cave Christmas or something like that. It was a write-off. I don't know what I did to Josh to make him so mad at me that he would make me watch that, but it was still a lot of fun. It was bad in a good way. You know, it was a lot of fun. And then we did the retrospective, which you are also going to hear today, right here on The Hodder Show. So if you did miss it on Still Loading Podcast, you're going to get it all right here, right now. Josh and I talk about some of our favorite episodes and favorite moments from the year. He had a really big year in his personal life as well. You know, of course, I talk about, you know, the 5th year anniversary, episode 300, a bunch of other cool stuff, launching the Dread Files, the audio, narration stuff. A lot of really fun things to unpack. And then also what some of our goals that we wanted to accomplish this year and whether or not we accomplished them. Some goals we have for next year and just some really fun overall positive talk, as well as, you know, some hiccups down the road there, because it has been an interesting year, you know, with everything going on. But I think it's a wonderful way to end the year, and I cannot wait for you guys to hear this. Before I jump in, I want to thank everybody for their support on last week's episode of the show, in which I continued the tradition of Christmas ghost stories here on The Hodder Show, and I hope that you guys checked that out. That was a lot of fun. Another crossover episode with the Dread Files, a story I wrote. I woke to a strange sound early Christmas morning. Had a couple people message me say that they really enjoyed it. So thank you very much to those people. I very much appreciate it. And if you didn't check it out, maybe go check it out. Yes, it's a story based on Christmas, but it doesn't have to be Christmas in order for you to appreciate it. And it's creepiness, I think, anyway. So definitely be sure to go check that out. And without further ado, we're going to jump into this episode here, my chat with Josh Colville from Still Loading Podcast, the crossover episode with Still Loading Podcast, the End of the Year Retrospective for 2021. Let's get into it. Happy day of Still Loading Retrospect with The Hodder Show.
I know, right?
Let's be serious. That's the real...
So we're going to transition into our End of the Year Retrospective that we always do. And we were talking off mic how, like, it seems like every time we do one of these, you just happen to get so disillusioned with podcasting like the week before we record. But you still keep on grinding, man. You've been at it for almost as I think I started mine like maybe a year before yours, but you've done more episodes than I have.
Yeah, I'll be on. So as we are dropping this, I'll be a couple months away from 6 years of doing the podcasting. And with the whole disillusion thing, it's like I tend to have like a really bad week before we do these for some reason. This is like the third year in a row it's happened. I just have I have like a couple really shitty exchanges and I'm like, seriously? But overall, like, it's been a really interesting year, and it's been a year of a lot of big things that happened for me, you know? So like, there's a lot of really fun things to talk about, and, you know, some great episodes and some stuff that I always wanted to do that I did. And the biggest project I've ever taken on, I did this year too. So like, there's a lot of stuff to talk about for sure for me. And I know for you, you know, you're in the same boat. There's a lot of cool things you did this year, man.
It was a lot of fun stuff. Yeah. And I try to skirt the line with these types of episodes. So we're not just, you know, tooting our own horns so much and, you know, being super, like, I don't know, like you can be a little, you know, to not come off as arrogant. I think we even talked about this last year too, about like wanting to be, you want to be able to appreciate your accomplishments throughout the year, but also not come off as like a holier than thou or like some type of arrogant fucking prick.
You can be proud of what you did, especially
exactly
when you're doing
being arrogant.
end of the year retrospective. Like, it's kind of hard to not kind of toot your own horn a little bit.
I mean, technically, I don't even have to do these retrospectives, but I kind of like to. I kind of find it fun as almost like a wrap up for the year, just to kind of.
Same here.
Like, it's fun and plus we don't get to podcast together often because our shows are pretty different in terms of
for sure,
of content. You know, like you focus a lot more on music and wrestling and like a lot your specific interests, and mine is like I have a lot of interests outside of gaming, but I focus solely on
you are a gaming podcast.
I'm a gaming podcast, so it's hard for us to find topics to really podcast together on unless I'm coming on for your show to bullshit, because you have a little bit more leeway with that kind of stuff. So I love doing these, not just because it's fun to look back and seeing like I was telling you, I think it'd be fun to like talk about what our most downloaded episodes are this year.
Yeah, and comparing them to what our favorite episode was.
And compared to what our favorite episode is, we're going to get into all that. But I guess before we get into that, what would you say is one of your biggest accomplishments for the podcast this year? I know mine.
Yeah, it's pretty easy for me because looking at this year, 2021, with the show, I hit 2 huge milestones. I hit my 5-year podcast anniversary, which I did the 5th year anniversary special for the Hotter Show, which was I think it was 4 hours long or 3.5 hours long of content with multiple different people doing all these different types of interviews and basically just talking about the history of the show and these people that are super important to the show and why they're important. And basically it was kind of like, it was a huge accomplishment. And I basically did that episode as almost like a love letter to to the show from me, because it was like, okay, I want to look back on this one day and go, hey, here are the people that in one way or another were super important to this show, and acknowledging that and going, without these people, the show wouldn't be what it is, or just they were important, or they were, such a great guest, or they're a friend of mine, and, so that was definitely a huge accomplishment. Then also I hit my 300th episode, which, I mean, that's pretty big accomplishment too.
Hit my 200th.
Which is huge too, right? And you had such a kick-ass 200th episode, man. Like,
that was fun.
Fun.
So much fun to do. For me, it was the 2 biggest accomplishments were the 200th episode, and then just being able to get back to weekly content after having a kid. Because for longtime listeners of the show, I would generally release every other week because it was so hard for me to figure out topics in advance. Like one of the reasons I stopped doing, like when I first started the podcast over like 7.5 years ago. And I would do like 10 episodes and then just stop because I was tired of coming. Like I would get frustrated that I would always come up with ideas last minute, and it was getting aggravating to have to come up with ideas and try to get my buddy Justin to get over here. And it was just hard. And no, that's no shade against Justin. His schedule is busy. And it's like, unless you are making this a priority, and I understand, like, you're doing this for fun and for like, you're spending your time with it.
Absolutely.
So, like, I get it. So there's that. But then, so I would do that for a couple months, take like a 9-10 month hiatus, and then do another batch of like 10 episodes, and then take another 9 to 10 month hiatus. And it wasn't until I figured like, maybe I just shouldn't do it weekly. Maybe I should go every other week. So then for like 3 years, I went every other week. I started in 2014. I want to say 2017 is when I started doing every other week, and stayed consistent from 2017 up through last year, which was the summer of PS2. And I did that full series weekly of PS2 games. And because of being able to prep for that, I was able to figure out how to keep weekly content going. But of course, once I finally got that started, my wife and I got pregnant. My wife got pregnant. So I had to figure out like, okay, I don't know if I can keep up with a weekly content schedule on top of being a first time dad, like that's just so much work. And I wasn't sure if I could do it, but I scaled it back to every other week starting in January, because that's when the kid was due. And I went January, February, and March as every other week. But then starting in April, I figured out, like, okay, let me try to do these mini episodes. Like every other week will be a mini episode instead of a full one. And that's what started the episodes with Dexter, with the Captain N episodes, which really aren't that many. They're about 50 minutes to an hour each. But so they're quote unquote mini, but they're, I don't know. And
you don't have to put quite as much prep into it, maybe.
No, because the only prep I have to do, and Dexter and we record 2 episodes at once, so we knock out 2 months worth of work in an afternoon, and then I just have to edit it when I have time. So that was the one helpful thing, and then figuring out the other thing was that History of RTS series that I did this year, and that actually I'm pretty proud of too, just because there was a lot of research to do. Like I spent a lot of time researching different games and having to write all the scripts for that and keep the scripts flowing so it sounded like I was speaking off the cuff and somewhat naturally, which I was not, but I tried to make it sound more natural.
You did a great job with it.
Oh, thank you. So first time dad trying to reestablish a weekly content schedule, and then doing the 200th episode. And then after the 200th, I actually started the Patreon. And so far I've already done 3 bonus episodes for that. So like I'm making more content than I ever was. And I think this year was just proved to me how much I'm actually able to get done and still have free time for myself and still keep my sanity in some way, shape or form, So I'm very grateful for this year. And not only because I got to meet a bunch of new people, which we'll get into later, but like becoming a dad's this has been the toughest year of my life. I love my kid to pieces and I miss her every day I go to work, just about. But like having a newborn is no fucking joke. Like it's insane how little you know about being a human until you have a little one. Like it's wild. The fact that like one of the biggest realizations to me was my kid would get overtired, right? And then she would be so tired that she couldn't calm herself down to fall asleep. So she would just stay fussing. And it makes no sense to me as an adult how you can be so tired that you can't fall asleep. But that's what happened to her.
See, I totally get that. I'm that way. Like I'll be so tired that I just can't fall asleep, and I'm
makes no sense to me.
Yeah,
it makes that's what happens, and it's crazy. What my anxiety has been the worst it's ever been this year. I've had such bad anxiety. I'm not going to go into any more detail than that. Just I have no problem saying that I have that issue, but with all that, this podcast and you listeners out there who are listening to this have been the biggest source of relief for this anxiety for me, because it gives me this creative outlet to push through. And I don't know what the future is going to hold. I don't know what my kid's schedule is going to be, because that's the whole reason I'm able to do this, because my kid goes to bed early. So I spend 5 hours every night. I have 5 hours to myself almost every night, because I usually stay up till midnight or 12:30 and sacrifice a little bit of sleep for the next day. So I can either do podcasting, stream on Twitch, or just watch a TV show with my wife. I try to do that at least once or twice a week, just to like spend time with my wife. So that way it's not just all this, right?
That's important.
Yeah. And it really means a lot, because this has been the biggest year for my show, not just in terms of content, but in terms of listenership. It took a while, but the last like 2 or 3 months, my average downloads have grown, and that's all thanks to you listeners. So this podcast this year, and I talk about it a little bit on the 200th episode, just as a thank you. But this podcast has meant the fucking world to me this year, because the amount of anxiety from being a new dad has been awful for me. I'm not saying every dad's like that. It's just my personal experience. And this has been such a blessing for me to be able to, like, a couple times a week, talk to some cool people, talk to some friends, and just bullshit about video games for an hour or two. It's been such a wonderful thing for me.
Well, for sure. And like, that's the thing too, right? Like as creative people, like you need that outlet. And I know for myself too, like if I have a really particularly long day or whatever, or something stressing me out or whatever, I need that outlet.
Mm-hmm.
And when I don't have it, like I had a week off literally like 2 weeks ago because I was like, I physically cannot sit at this computer and record a podcast. Like my voice is shot. Like I'm just like, I can't do it. I don't have the mental focus to do it today. And, you know, I hate doing that because then a couple days later, I'm like, man, I can't believe I missed an episode. Like, damn it. Like, and then it's like, I do miss doing it so much because then I don't have that outlet, right?
Well, and it's like I was saying at the beginning of the episode, how like I don't get to talk to you all that often. I don't get to collaborate with you on podcasts all that often. So it's like the podcast I've found to be like, it turns, for better or worse, and sometimes worse, it has turned being able to schedule appointments with friends into like you're feeling productive. You're not just spending time with friends, you're also making content, and that's awesome. But it also is a slippery slope to an extent, because it's like if you're having a conversation with friends and you almost feel like you have to save stuff for, like, if they're on a show or something like that.
Yeah, and that can be a slippery slope for sure.
I'm grateful that I'm a solo host, because if I had a permanent co-host and we had like a really good conversation outside of it, I'm like, oh man, I wish we could have recorded that. I don't have to deal with that. So that's I'm very grateful for that. But yeah, man, it's just, this year has been probably the toughest in my life, just because of lots of other stuff that I won't go into on the podcast. But the last 2 years between the pandemic, I don't mind saying this, my grandparents passed away last year. I think I even mentioned that on our retrospective last year. So between my grandparents passing away last year, the pandemic continuing on from last year, this year, and then also trying to figure out how the fuck to raise a kid in a pandemic, on top of obviously just new time parent jitters, like it's been a tough couple of years. And this is not a woe is me. I think I'm generally still pretty happy. I'm very happy with everything that's going on. It's been tough, and this podcast has been there for me. And you listeners, like, I know I keep calling you out specifically, but it's seriously, like, even though I don't hear a lot of feedback directly, the download numbers, just seeing people download this means more to me than you could know, just because it validates that I'm not just screaming into the void. You know,
there's nothing quite like when you put up content and you know there's people that are actually listening and checking it out. It is such a wonderful feeling, regardless of how many people it is. Like, it's a really wonderful feeling.
It really is. So I think in terms of our content, let's use that as a transition into talking about what are some of our favorite episodes were this year. Some of our own favorite content was. Admittedly, dude, I don't get a chance to listen to your show a lot, so I apologize. You seem to listen to almost every one of mine, and now I'm such a bad friend. I don't listen to nearly enough of your stuff. I did listen to your first like audio drama horror story stuff. That was really good.
Thank you. I appreciate that, man. That was, and I mean, I get behind on your stuff, and I try and, you know, catch
it's
up.
so hard, dude. And
yeah,
I don't have an excuse though, bro. I don't know why I never use the word bro. I don't know why I used it there. I don't have an excuse though, man. I literally listen to, I'm going to talk about it later, because on my podcasting app on my phone, it keeps track of all my podcast listening data. I literally listen to podcasts all day long at work, like minimum of 4 to 7 hours a day. So it makes it seem like I have no life when you look at my playback statistics, but it's all while I'm at work. So anyway, I'll get into those playback statistics later in the episode. But TJ, what are some of your favorite episodes from this past year?
So for me, like, obviously it goes without saying, I have to shout out again the 50th anniversary special. That was the biggest project I've ever taken on. Even when I was editing, 4 podcasts a week and doing a bunch of other different stuff, I put days and days into that episode.
I believe it.
Having you involved with it, having all the people involved with it was so much fun to reconnect with people. I listened to it back just like a month ago, just to kind of listen through it, the whole thing from start to finish. And like, I'm really proud of that because I think it came together quite well. If I have one regret from it, it's that I focused a lot on the video side of things and not so much on the audio quality. And that's something that going forward, I've just decided I'd rather have just an audio podcast again and focus on having great audio. But, you know, looking back at that, it's such a special episode because, like, man, like I've been doing this for 5 years. Like, that's a big deal, you know, and it's something I'm super proud of. And that's something that I'm always going to have to look back on as kind of like, you know, you can see during that episode, there's more than a few times where, like, on my face, you can see like how much fun I'm having and getting to reconnect with people like my boy Anthony, who I hadn't talked to in a couple of years, getting my boys Folk Found movie reviews to literally get back together one time only to come on the show. Like, I didn't think that was going to happen. And that was such a special moment for me because those guys had such a profound impact on me. And like, it was just like, looking back, I'm like, I can't believe I did it because of just how many hours I put into it.
Trying to schedule everything, schedule all the people. I know that struggle.
Yeah. And there's a lot of people that I just couldn't make work too. There was supposed to be another 10 people on that episode.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, man, if I ended up pulling that off, it would have been like 5 hours long.
So many people.
And it's like, holy shit. But that's definitely a special one. And it's always going to be, obviously, episode 300. I mean, come on. You know, that was one of my
big milestone. It's a big fucking milestone.
It's one of my most downloaded episodes ever. One of my favorite local businesses. I had them on. And, you know, it was great. And it was also my first in-person interview I had done since the pandemic started. So that's really,
dude, it's been so long since I've been able to, actually, you know what? For my 200th, I had my buddy Justin in person because we're both vaccinated. So we could both be in person. In fact, I'll tell a funny story about the recording of the 200th episode later. But that's great, man. That's I don't know. I love hearing that. And I just looked at like the runtime again for your 5-year anniversary, 3.5 hours.
3.5. I thought it was 3.5, and
that's fucking wild.
And the thing is, there's a probably about an hour of stuff that got cut. Like I cut a solid. There was Brandon, Ryan, you, Chris, Anthony, and Joe. All of our segments I cut half an hour off of.
Wow.
Give or take. I think I only did about 10, 15 minutes or something like that.
That's right, because I'm more important.
Yeah, because you're a pro. But and it was hard to do that because I was like, this is all good stuff and it's important. But
I would have just kept it on.
Yeah.
4 hours, who gives a fuck?
Well, it would have been
5, 6 hours.
Over 5, 6. I think when I put it all together, and mind you, this is on my old laptop too.
Oh, so yeah. No wonder that you had to limit it.
For me to edit a 3.5 hour video or a 6 hour video, I would have been, it took me basically 2 hours just to move parts around. Jesus and that was, Christ. I mean, thank God for this which is a huge thing this year, obviously getting a new laptop, you know, but that was something really special, you know, and obviously it goes without saying, I have to talk about, I had a lot of killer interviews this year. You know, I reached out to some people and I had on my first author very recently, which was awesome.
I said I don't listen to episodes often. I listened to that one.
Yeah, you messaged me about that one.
I loved that episode with the horror author.
Yeah, Mark Taus, who is just incredible. And he was such a great guest. Like, he's one of my favorite interviews I think I've ever done, man. And it was so much fun. That's definitely a standout. There's starting off the year. I started off the year with my boy Neil from Deadlight, and that's, you know, like we'll talk about a little bit later about download numbers and shit. But that was a big one for that. And obviously it goes without saying, you know, one big thing that happened with me this year was I randomly started writing horror on Reddit for No Sleep and
that's
stuff like that.
I forgot about that. That's been a big thing for you recently.
And in doing that, I decided to, instead of me reading other people's Halloween content for my show for Halloween, which I've always done every year. I've done some kind of scary content. I was like, well, shit, why don't I read my own stuff? So I did 6 stories in total that were all my own creations. And I did 3 episodes, all narrated by me with full sound effects and music and stuff like that. And obviously that was super special. It was so much fun. I had so many kind words about that. And, as someone who loves the art of voice acting and wants to slowly dip my feet into that world a little bit, that was almost like my first step to really try, because I tried to do different voices and voices that I thought sounded tacky and really silly. But I was like, let me expand my voice a bit here and see what I can do. And I've had some really kind words and some great feedback, some great constructive criticism about it. And it's like, that's fantastic. But
that's the best you can ask for, man. Like constructive criticism and positive feedback. Cause I'd rather be told okay, you could do this and this a little bit better, but it's, obviously you don't want the shitty criticism, but constructive criticism.
You suck. Well, what's
just being literally telling you you could do this and this better. That's super beneficial. I'll shout this. I've shouted this out a bunch of times, but I got, one of my earliest reviews was a 4-star review where the guy said I was too hard on myself, and, not being rude, just being sometimes just saying flat out, yeah, he's too hard on himself sometimes. And that's the only reason I didn't make this a 5. I was like, you know what? Fair enough. I've always been a little too self-deprecating because I don't know.
Same here.
Maybe it's a defense mechanism, but who knows? And honestly, part of that is part of the way to combat that is kind of this end of the year retrospective where it's like we get to talk about some of our favorite moments about it, not how great everything is, just some of our favorite moments from the past year of podcasting.
Yeah. And it's funny because one thing, hearkening back to our retrospective last year, one thing I said during it was I wanted to do one thing in the year that scared me. Whether it was reaching out to someone that I thought was going to say no, or almost even worse would say yes. And then it'd be like, oh my God, I have to interview this person now. And I did do that. I set a goal for myself. I wanted to reach out to 5 people that I didn't think would say yes. That was kind of like my goal. And, unfortunately, they didn't say yes, or I didn't get a response or whatever. Stuff like that happens, right? Mm-hmm. But as far as something to scare myself, and I'm going to end off my portion of this with this. For about 3 years now, I have really wanted to do a narration of a specific story that I love and I have loved since I was a kid. And I always wanted to do it, but I never had the confidence or just the balls to do it. Because I was like, I am going to get shredded if I don't do at least an okay job on this.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, which some people may be familiar from The Simpsons Treehouse of Horror.
Oh, or just the poem itself.
Or just the poem, of course, yeah.
One of the most famous poems of all time.
Yeah, you'd be amazed how many people don't think it's like a skit from The Simpsons. You'd be amazed how many people think that. Well, you did the Simpsons poem. It's like, what? No, man, it's fucking.
No. So they do know it's a skit from The Simpsons, but they don't know that it's actually based off a real thing.
It's a real poem.
Okay, that's what I was confused about.
They know it's real, but they have never experienced it otherwise. And I'm like, how have you not experienced? It's like one of the most famous things of all time. Like, come on. Yeah, quote the Raven, never, seriously?
Never more.
Yeah. So, hearkening back to that, I think that was something I always wanted to try and do. And I was like, so many legendary people have done this story. Obviously James Earl Jones' version on The Simpsons was fantastic. And he has a full version of it, of him doing it, which is incredible. Why am I drawing a blank on his name now? Oh my gosh. He plays Count Dooku on Star Wars.
Christopher Lee,
who is his version of The Raven is mind blowing. And there's
he also
obviously
does heavy metal music, or did.
Oh, he
when
sure
passed away.
did. And it is
It's good. Okay, good to know. Good to know.
Oh, it's very good. It's very good. Operatic, very heavy.
Yeah. That would make sense for his style. Like I can't imagine him doing like screaming.
No, it's him
imagine
singing,
that old dude like
No,
That'd
it's
be funny as
very,
shit.
but it's like almost like heavier.
Yeah.
Because it's Sir Christopher Lee, and he has a claymore, and it's like Charlemagne. It's like, whoa.
Have you ever heard the story? So he was in a James Bond movie. He was in The Man with the Golden Gun. He was Scaramanga. And famously, I don't know if it was in that movie or one other movie he was doing, but the sound guys on the movie were trying to determine the sound of what it would sound like of someone getting stabbed in the back.
So that was Lord of the Rings.
Was it Lord of the Rings?
Yeah.
And he's like, no, that's not. This is how it would sound. Because he was actually in like the SAS and shit, and he was like in covert ops. People. He actually killed people. Dude was a fucking badass. It was wild,
real motherfucker. But yeah, so and there was what gave me the inspiration to do it was there is a fantastic podcast it's my favorite podcast, and I'd be remiss if I didn't shout it out, and that's called The Grey Rooms. And it's a horror anthology podcast, and it's amazing. And the creator and one of the voice actors and the producer of that podcast, his name's Jason Gray. He did a version of The Raven, and it's my favorite version of it. And I listened to it and I went, man, like this is just, it's incredible. He did it a couple of years ago, and I hadn't seen anyone do it recently. And I was like, like, I want to do this as a tribute. It's not, hey, look how great I am. It's something that I wanted to do to challenge myself, because I was so scared to do it, because I was like, man, this is not some Reddit story I wrote. This is
classic literature.
This is a classic literature. If I do this and butcher it, people are going to light me up. And I knew in particular there was a couple of people who they would have told me, hey, dude, you butchered this. You should take it down. Like, and I was ready for that, because I was like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to read it how I hear it in my head, and I'm going to do my best, and I'm going to challenge myself with this. And I did about probably, I think 23 takes of it, something along those lines. And I spent hours editing it and spacing it differently. And obviously listening back to it, I'm like, oh, I do 100 things differently, right? That's how it always is going to be. But when it was all said and done, I'm really proud of it. And there's a couple people in particular that I thought were going to say like, dude, like this was really ballsy. I don't know if I would have done this, but they actually had some really kind things to say. And they were like, I expected this to not be as good as it was. And I was like, I mean, like I'll take it.
I think working in a weird sense in that specific situation, not all situations in the creative field, but working out of a place of fear almost can help propel it, because you become a perfectionist in those moments where you're like, I need to make sure that I'm doing this the right way to pull this off in the way that not only I think just like justifies the work, or it pays adequate tribute to the work that you're doing, but it also not only are you doing that, but you're also trying to make sure that it's interesting for the audience and all that good stuff, and putting your own spin on it as best you can. So yeah, I get that. I don't even remember what I said at the end of my goal at the end of, did you listen to that episode recently?
I didn't. I just happen to remember that was something I said.
I don't know what I said.
Oh no.
I don't remember what my goal was last year.
But you had a pretty hefty year too. And I mean, obviously like you've talked about a few things, but like for you, what was some of your favorite moments from the year and some favorite episodes from the year?
So probably my favorite episode from the year is I've shouted it out before, but my episode with Dearest Abby on Donkey Kong Classics. So I did it for longtime listeners of the show. I actually talked about this on the LAN Parties podcast that I guested on a couple weeks ago. And they were asking me what one of my favorite episodes was. And I mentioned this one as well, because for longtime listeners of the show, I did this thing called the 40 for 40 series, where I did 40 complete in the box NES games. I would say if I'm lucky, half of those episodes are good. I think it's less than half, almost certainly.
I would disagree with that, but go on.
I am very not proud of a lot of that stuff. And I'm not even saying that to be down on myself, but I did Donkey Kong Classics for it. And I spent this is one of the reasons I needed to redo it. And I'm going to be redoing some of those games in the future. I don't know when, but I do want to redo some of those episodes. Donkey Kong Classics, when I covered for the 40 for 40 series back in like 2017 or something like that, it was a total runtime of 23 minutes. Not only did I cover Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr. in those 23 minutes, but I also covered Double Dragon. All three of those games, even if you take out Donkey Kong Jr., those two games, Donkey Kong and Double Dragon, are two of the most fucking important games of all time. And I spent 20 minutes total between the two of them and add in a third game as well. Donkey Kong, it cannot be understated how important that game is for the video game industry. And I go into details like that in the Donkey Kong episode with Dearest Abby. But doing that episode with Dearest Abby felt like such a cathartic thing for me because I got to fix something that I thought was bad. And not only do I think that I fixed it, I think I made it significantly better. And I shouldn't say I did it. Abby was a fantastic guest because she's a competitive Donkey Kong player and she goes into the details of what these competitive players do to get high scores and strategies that I would have never thought of. And like talking about how the competitive players, like professional competitive players, can manipulate how the barrels fall down the girders so that way they can layer them over top of each other. And when you jump over one, it's actually three just stacks on top of each other. And so they get like quintuple the points or some shit like that. Like stuff like that. I think that was my favorite episode from this year, but other highlights, the 200th episode, obviously,
of course. Yeah.
That was super fun. I also did, if we're going with the idea of like challenging ourselves this year, I did try a bunch of new stuff. The 200th episode was a fully improv episode, and not just like technically all of my episodes are, most of my episodes are improv. It's casual conversation, but that was like my attempt at improv comedy. I don't know if I pulled it off. I think it turned out pretty well, but obviously it's actually one of my most downloaded episodes this year, which we will also get into. So it's just, I was actually very happy with how that turned out, even though I wasn't quite sure if I could pull it off because I've never done anything like that with improv. Like I'm not an actor, I'm not an improviser, so I wasn't sure if I could pull something off like that. The other thing I tried was I did a text adventure as an episode where I would bring people on and we would play through a text adventure video game. I would read off the prompt on the mic and then my guests would respond and we would come up with jokes and stuff as we would proceed through the adventure.
Which those were really fun. I really enjoyed those.
I did too. I think the second one I didn't do quite as good. My guests were fantastic. That was with British Bond Addict and James Burb over on Instagram. And they were fantastic. I think I was a little bit more jumbled with it, but still, I was really happy with how those episodes turned out because that was a lot of fun. So I would say my favorite ones were one other highlight. Gabe Swore. He was probably the highlight of my year in terms of interviews. He's an animator. He is the executive producer for the Animaniacs show on Hulu.
Yes, right. I'm okay. I remember that now.
That blew me away that I could get him on, and that he's like, I don't have his number or anything, but like we still message each other back and forth every now and then. And like he came on again to do a Tiny Toons adventure episode where we do Tiny Toon Adventures Buster's Hidden Treasure for the Sega Genesis. And to kind of branch this into our most downloaded episodes, his episodes were my top 2.
I'm not surprised.
The first episode with him was my number 1 most popular episode from this year. The part 2 with him is not in the top 10, surprisingly enough. I thought that was kind of weird, but part 1 is super high. And then his Tiny Toon Adventures ones is literally only, even though it came out over 3 months later, it's actually only 7 downloads below his.
Oh, wow.
It's crazy. So those were my 2 most popular episodes, and Gabe is an awesome dude. I'm going to have him on again at some point. I don't know for what. I want to have him on for Captain N because he's an animator. He has so much experience in animation.
He could bring something else to the table.
Oh my God, right? So much knowledge and so much. So instead of just us ripping on a cartoon, he will have so much insight into what goes into making these cartoons and shit like that. Like I don't know if he'd be willing to do that. And Gabe, if you're listening to this, I hope you'd be willing to do it because I would love to have you on for that. So I'm going to reach out to him at some point. But him and I were planning on doing, it's an informal series. I do so many fucking series on the show, but it's an informal series where we're going to do episodes on video games based off of cartoons. Since he's an animator, I thought that's a cool thing to do. So we started with Tiny Toons and he's going to pick the next one. I picked Tiny Toon at Buster's Hidden Treasure and he's going to pick the next one whenever we end up doing that. I should reach out to him. We should do that for maybe January, February. Anyway, so yeah. Before I go into through my top 10 of most of my downloaded episodes this year, what about yours? What are some of your top ones?
So for me, it's funny. There is an episode I have, and I have to say it was I'm going to talk about the ones I released this year that were my top downloaded, but every year consistently for the past 5 years, going on 6 now, my top downloaded episode every year has been episode 19 of the show. Consistently, without fail, nothing comes close to it.
Why?
I did an episode on Lane Staley from Alice in Chains, and it was just a tribute episode. It's 20 minutes long. Yes, I talk about my love for Alice in Chains and how much Lane means to me and blah, 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 blah. But just for whatever freaking reason, it's like this albatross on my back that just won't leave me alone, because no matter what I do, I re-released the episode and did alternative commentary thinking maybe, and nope, just consistently that episode. It's always my most downloaded no matter what I do. I can't get away from it.
That's really
so I always have to shout that episode out because it's a bad joke. Me and my old producer still talk about it. He's like, "How's that episode doing?" And I'm like, "Better than anything else I release." It's a bad joke.
It's one of those things where it's and we'll get into it with mine. My most downloaded episode of all time is from 2017. And it actually is in the top 10 for downloaded episodes this year.
Of course it is.
And I'm just surprised. But what's interesting is all the other episodes are from this year. So I think,
that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of all time downloads, let me see. Actually, I have it sorted right now. There's no episode from this year in the top 10 of all time downloads for the show. But that's, that doesn't bother me because, there's tons of stuff that
they're
comes
also
out.
up longer, right? So
they're up, yeah. In fact, Gabe swore the one that I mentioned is the highest downloaded one for this year. That is tied for it's in the low 20s, 21, 22, something like that.
Yeah.
So that's pretty good considering it came out just not even 10 months ago, at least in my opinion. But yeah. That's funny though. So your most downloaded episode is episode 19, and it's consistently this week. Let me see this week here. Today. That's really fucking funny.
Let me see. Last 7 days, it is my top downloaded episode. So
that's really funny. I'll have to see.
Dude, it's a bad joke that just won't leave me alone. But as far as this year, it's hard for me because I do the video thing on YouTube as well with a lot of my stuff.
Yeah, I do too, but I don't have the nice video component. It's just audio with a thumbnail.
Yeah, I do the same thing with a lot of stuff, but so one of my most viewed and technically downloaded episodes of the year was my chat with my boy Neil from Deadlight. That video did leaps and bounds more. Well, I shouldn't say leaps and bounds, but it did quite a bit better than anything else. But then download wise, my episode 300 was my most downloaded episode. But then there's the 5th year anniversary episode, which did really well. My chat with Mark Taus did really well. My Halloween stuff did quite well. It's funny to look at stuff that like I knew that I shouldn't say I knew. I figured the 5th year anniversary would do well. And I knew that Neil and Deadlight, like I know he has a lot of fans, and so I was like, oh, this is going to be a good episode. But I was like, and he was shocked too, because I told him like, dude, like you're my most down, because at that point, like I had more downloads and views on his episode than I did on pretty much anything else for the last like few months. And he was like, really?
Like podcast providers, which fucked all your numbers.
I mean, I'm not even going to get into that, but yeah, I mean, I lost a lot. That I, to be brutally honest, I still haven't recovered from that, if I'm being brutally honest. Which that
word
was
to the wise for prospective podcasters out there: do not use SoundCloud.
If you're going to start a podcast, talk to me first, because I have a lot of really good things to tell you not to do.
Don't go to SoundCloud. Dude, I made that mistake too. Some of my oldest episodes.
Yeah.
So if you look at my podcast feed, it only goes down to episode 7 because the first 6 are over on SoundCloud. We've talked about this before, I think. And at some point I will re-release those episodes. And I'm not waiting for anything specific. I just don't feel like finding the audio for it again.
Yeah.
So who knows? For me, right, looking at my top 10, my number 10 out of everything, and considering it only came out not even 2 months ago, I'm pretty happy with that. The 200th episode.
Nice.
Everything else is from June or earlier, but the 200th episode is number 10, followed by the first episode of this past year of 2021. It was Hockey Games with Pat Hickey Jr. Then that's number 9. Number 8 is the one from 2017. That's Metal Arms Glitch in the System. I don't know why this episode gets so many downloads, because this is a relatively obscure game. Nobody fucking knows about this game. I've sung its praises for so long, and I'm just constantly amazed by the fact that this episode continues to get downloads, so much so that it is my most downloaded episode of all time. Though technically, I believe I did an episode on Final Fantasy VI around the same time, and I use Libsyn as my hosting site.
Yeah.
And for a while, it separated Spotify downloads and your RSS feed downloads, and Spotify told me I had like over 600 downloads for that episode at one point, or 600 listens. But then when they switched it over, suddenly my downloads suddenly dropped off from Spotify. So I'm very confused by that. But if we're going by current modern numbers, Metal Arms Glitch in the System is by far the most popular. I shouldn't say by far. It's actually, it's by a solid 50 some odd downloads. Which is just interesting. But anyway, then we got at number 7, Super Mario Sunshine. At number 6, I'd have to see, I can't see the full name. It's one of the GameCube Hidden Gems episodes. I do not know which one it is. If it's like the first one, I did 2 of them, right? So I don't know if it's like the first one or the...
If I had to guess, I'd say it was the first one, just because in my experience with doing like, 1 and 2 or part 1 and 2 or whatever, first ones always do better. Right. Always do better.
Yeah, it's the first one. I just double checked. Then followed by Uncharted Lost Legacy, which was my second episode of the year. That's at number 5. Number 4, Super Mario 64. Number 3 is the Game Boy Advance. From back, that was a game, because this year was the 20th anniversary of the Game Boy Advance, just like it was the 20th anniversary of Halo, and the 20th anniversary of the Xbox, and the 20th anniversary of the Nintendo GameCube, and the 30th anniversy of the Super Nintendo.
Holy shit! I didn't realize.
Last year was Super Nintendo's 30th. I think I don't remember when the North American release date for the Super Nintendo was. Now I believe it was 1990 in Japan and 91 in the US, but I'm not entirely certain off the top of my head. I feel bad for not knowing that as someone who really likes it. I fucking called it. August 23rd, 91 is the release date for North America for the Super Nintendo. So yeah, 30th anniversary for the release of the Super Nintendo, at least in the US and Canada. So, and then obviously the top 2, Tiny Toon Adventures, Buster's Hidden Treasure with Gabe, and then the top 1 is Gabe's episode.
which doesn't surprise me because that was a great
episode. So I specifically put Animaniacs in the title because I knew that would get higher. This is going to sound super fucking nerdy, but SEO.
I get what you're saying.
Yeah. For those who don't know, SEO is search engine optimization, basically including things in the title that you know is going to get. It's the definition of clickbait. You know, you're trying to find things that the search algorithms are going to seek out and prioritize your shit above other people's shit. And if I typed in Gabe Swore, you know, people don't know a lot of the people behind animation, with the exception of voice actors.
Yeah.
So since he's a producer, people might not know that the amount of work that Gabe does on this stuff. So I included Gabe's name as the primary thing, but then I also mentioned Animaniacs, and I'm pretty sure that's the only reason this episode continues to climb as high as it does. In fact, it doesn't have any so far in December, but it had 2 downloads last month and 10 in October, which is very surprising.
Yeah, considering how old it is.
Yeah. What about you? What are your top downloaded ones?
So I don't have like a list in front of me. That was one thing I didn't do. But like,
mine just does it.
Yeah,
That's mine doesn't have. So does it.
I use a great website that I highly recommend because, to be honest, they saved my podcast. And that's Anchor.
Completely
by
free,
Spotify.
It's great.
And Anchor's free. I mean, it's why I'm on it. But like when I had my Spotify thing happen, I reached out to a bunch of sites and basically said, hey, I need a thing where I can input this RSS feed, but also I need it to make sure it's all in order. I can't have any bull honky happening. So I tried to use another website and they uploaded it all in the wrong order. And I was paying for this website and I went, hey, like we need to fix this. And they were like, oh, you have to re-upload everything. And I was like, that's not how this should work. I'm paying you.
You should just take the RSS feed and transfer it over to your ownership.
Yeah. So, and then I contacted Anchor and they were like, hell yeah, dude, we got you. And it's been wonderful. But so the analytics aren't quite the same, but like for me, like I know for sure my top downloaded episode of the year on Anchor anyway, looking at YouTube is completely different, but for Anchor, it was without a shadow of a doubt my 300th episode with a local business here. That was definitely in town here. That was definitely by a landslide my most downloaded. Close behind that is actually my chat with Mark Taus. Which
that's such a good episode.
Yeah,
dude.
not surprising.
I love that episode.
Thank you, man. I wish I could take credit for it. When you
have a guest on, like your guest generates the content more than you do. You are more of a conduit for the guest. So, and that's not to if an episode's bad, I'm not blaming the guest for the episode being
of course.
Bad, if you fuck up the interview, the episode's going to be bad. That's not on the guest. If you fuck up the interview, you fuck up the interview. But but a lot of times, like interviews, it's not you, it's not us. We're just we're the conduit for the guest to get their information out there.
And that's how you to me anyway. That's when you know you've got a good head for interviewing, is you understand that.
Oh, it's. I mean, I do interject some of my own like personal anecdotes, but that's more of in an effort to make the guest feel comfortable, and because I want them to realize that I'm like trying to engage with them in a conversation and not necessarily just being like, "Here, you promote your shit, and I'm getting a cool guest out of it." Like that's obviously a part of the transaction, but like I've said this 1,000 times before, and I will continue to say it. Like whenever I have guests on, my goal is to build some type of a relationship with them, like some type of a friendship. And I understand it's not going to happen all the time. In fact, there's a couple guests that I've had on that I've never spoken to again, and there's no ill will. It's just that's
how it goes. Sometimes
it's how it goes, and so. And there was never anything bad. It's just, there's certain guests that you, just like people, you click with really well and you stay in touch with them. And you want to continue to do more stuff with them. Gabe Swore is one of those. Like Gabe and I really hit it off. There's an episode that at the time this came out is now two weeks ago, but the episode with Jeremy Blaustein at the time we're recording this, it has not been released yet, but at the time this comes out, it will be out. The video game translator and localizer, we really hit it off. He was a really nice guy and I loved having him on the show. And so much so, like he added me on Facebook and we'll talk to each other now. It's really cool. So that's one of my favorite aspects of it. But okay, we've been going on for a little bit of time now. It's like an hour and a half. So what I want to do to wrap it up, I know this, I'm not expecting you to have this. If you do, awesome. But I'm going to go through my personal podcast listening statistics for the year, like shit that I listen to.
Oh, mine's easy. I know it off the top of my head. So you go.
Joe Rogan.
No, actually, no, not even close. He's not even my top 5, man.
Really?
Yeah.
We'll go for some of yours then, since you know yours.
Number 1 is the Grey Rooms, bar none. Mm-hmm. Doesn't even come close. I shouldn't say it doesn't come close, but the Grey Rooms is, I love it. Next up to that is SCP Archives, which is another horror anthology podcast I love. A close third to that is Talk is Jericho. I love Talk is Jericho.
Okay. Yeah. I've heard of that one.
Yep. A fourth to that is actually a one I discovered this year and binged. I've binged twice now because I love it so much. It's actually it's a comedy podcast, but it's like it's a really silly, like almost like supernatural comedy podcast.
Okay.
It's called Less is Morgue. It's a ghost and a ghoul talk about stuff, and it's just the silliest shit, but it's so fun. And I lose myself in it. And the voice acting and production is fantastic. And then fifth for that is Something to Wrestle With, Bruce Pritchard, because I love my wrestling.
My wrestling.
And then I mean, like, from there, obviously, like, and I'm not just saying this, like my top 10 for sure, you would be in my top 10 because I don't listen to a lot of gaming podcasts, but I always make sure I if I see an episode like your one, I'm going to already forget his damn name. And you said his name a bunch already. The Animaniac, Gabe
Swore.
Yeah.
Gabe Swore.
Jesus. Like when I see you do something like that, I'm like, I gotta check this out. Cause I'm not a huge gamer anymore, but like when I see things like that, or like your 200th episode or stuff that I see and I'm like, hey, this is cool. This is different. I'm always going to check that out. The Captain N stuff I love because I'm just like, it's so ridiculous and silly that I'm just like, and I think it's, too, and I think it's so lame that I'm like, I gotta see this. Like, I gotta check this out.
Such a good show. Yeah. Well, by good, I mean awful.
It's so bad. It's good. But I mean, that's definitely, looking at my top 5, like that's for sure. Like I listen to a lot of, my horror anthology podcasts have become kind of like my favorite main podcast. I don't listen to as much. Like, Joe Rogan definitely would be in my top 10, because I love listening to him mainly talk with his buddies,
As much as I dislike a lot of his viewpoints, he's a very good, like I've said before, he's a very good he's a very good interviewer. He's a very good podcaster. I mean, it makes sense though. He fucking does it like, he releases 3 episodes a week or every day a week.
But you know what's really funny? I went back today to episode 3 and 1 and 2, and I think I'm at episode like 20 right now of his podcast, and he was pretty much the same back then.
Okay,
obviously he's more refined because he's doing actual interviews now, but like, man, he had it back then. You could hear it. Like, it's just like it's such an entertaining conversation. It's just them bullshitting on a couch. And he's still doing the same thing. Yeah, they just have.
Some people just have the voice. Yeah. Some people just have that talent to do it.
Mm-hmm.
When you mentioned wrestling, though, I was going to bring up. I don't watch wrestling. Like, I've never really watched wrestling.
Yeah.
But I found on YouTube the WWE has a bunch of old matches, and there was like a 30-person, not a cage match. It was like a 30-person Royal Rumble.
Yep.
And from like 96 or 98 or something like that. So I watched all that. It literally started out so slow for me. I'm like, I don't get why people like this. Like, this is really fucking cheesy. But then by the end of it, I wasn't into it, but I was like, all right, this is actually kind of fun. I kind of like.
And that's
this.
like, I mean, if you were to say to me, hey TJ, send me some stuff that makes you love pro wrestling. I mean, like, I wouldn't send you a Royal Rumble match. I'd send you a bunch of stuff that's like more, like that shows off the real art form of professional wrestling and why it's so great.
You know what, dude? After this, send me something. Like if you can find it on YouTube, send me like
okay.
a match.
I'll see what I can find. I'll send you some stuff
because I legit watched the whole. It was like an hour long. I watched the whole thing. I don't know why I watched the whole thing, but I watched the whole thing. But okay, so for me with my podcast listening statistics, I use an app called Podcast Addict. And I fucking love this app because it's free to use. And what it does is that it calculates it down to the hours and sometimes even minutes of how much you listen. So in 2020, now mind you, I work an 8-hour shift at my job. And I can listen to podcasts almost the entire time while I'm there. I mean, obviously, nice. I do pause for when I'm on phone calls and when I'm on meetings. And obviously, if I'm focusing on something that's like requires a lot of attention. But by and large, I can listen to podcasts all day long while I'm there. In 2020, I listened to 41 days and 1 hour worth of podcasts.
Wow.
41 days.
Holy shit.
Now, with that said, we still have another, basically 20 some odd days at the time of this recording, about 20 some odd days before the end of the month. What do you want to guess my total number of, it's days, obviously, days of listening is for this year so far? And if you can get the hours too, I'd be good. But
give me the first number again? You said the one from last year.
2020, I listened to 41 days and 1 hour worth of podcasts over the course of 816 episodes.
I'm going to say you went up. And I'm going to say, I haven't put it that much. I'm going to say like 47 days and like 2 hours.
It's actually only 40 days. Only 40.
Oh, you went down. Okay.
So remember, I worked from home for 3 months taking care of the baby. I forgot about that. So for 3 months, I didn't listen to many podcasts. So I actually gained ground considerably if you think about it that way.
Well, there you go. So I have just started using Podcast Addict again. I used to use it all the time. Where are you finding this information? Because if you're in the app, the little if you're on the main menu where you see all of your podcast thumbnails and stuff like that, in the top right, there's like the 3 dots. Yeah.
Go to app settings. I'm sure this is riveting for our listeners. And then from that app settings, you click on My Account. And then you go all the way to the bottom. You scroll down and there's a playback statistics.
Aha.
Now, what's cool? So this is on. I'm looking at the well, dude, I listen to 8 hours a day. I just downloaded this app like a month ago, so I'm not that. Yeah. Anyway. So, and actually, mind you, this is. I found a way that you can transfer your data from phone to phone. You can actually export like your statistics and add it to, like, say you get a new phone and you want to keep all your listening statistics. You can actually export them and add it and send the file and open it up on your new phone. So this is actually the statistics I have for here are from 2 phones worth now from like 3 years ago. So I'll give my total total number of days listening globally between this year, last year, 2019, I think even into 2018 a little bit. But so in the month of November of this year, because it only shows the last 2 months that you've listened to in terms of specific hours, and then it gives you the yearly total. So like I said, 40 days and 14 hours is my total in 2021. In November, I had 6 days and 1 hour over the course of 111 episodes. So far in December, we're 8 days into it now. That gives a very specific date when we're recording this. It is 1 day and 14 hours over the course of 31 episodes. Holy shit. Yeah. So yeah. Now over globally, out of all the podcasts I've listened to over the last 3 years, I've spent 217 days and 8 hours. Wow. I don't know. See, I'm reading this off and all I can picture is a listener being like, what a fucking loser. No, like, listen, like you can listen to it all day at work, right? That's why I clarify it, because I listen to it. Like if I wasn't for work, I'd only be able to listen during my commutes and that's it. Pretty much same here. Like I can listen to it at my one part of my job. So like my podcast listening time has definitely gone way down from what it was, because I used to have an hour commute, right? So I listen to podcasts all the way home, all the way there,
time I was at my job, whereas now I only really have about 2 hours a day, hour and a half or so, maybe, to listen to podcasts. So I'm very picky.
Meanwhile, I have like 9 and a half hours to listen to podcasts. It's wild between my commutes and because I have a long commute too.
Yeah.
The amount of time that I've skipped globally, because I skip through the ads and stuff like that. 1 day and then 1 hour of skipping at like 30
crazy.
seconds a clip. Today alone, because I worked today, I listened to 7 hours and 7 minutes worth of podcasts over the course of 6 episodes.
Jeez.
So if we look at my numbers for the year, my top listened to podcasts, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4,
The Harder
5,
Show.
6,
No, I'm kidding.
7. We're going to go with my top 10. One of them is my own because I mark, you download the episode for your number. I don't actually re-listen to every episode. So I'm not, it's technically within my top 10, but I'm not counting it. I'm just adding another one underneath it.
Yeah.
And one of them is, and 2 of these in here are linked together because one is the original feed and the other is is a Patreon RSS feed.
Yeah.
So at number 10 is Land Parties Pod, where I've spent 1 day and 7 hours listening to it this year. That shout out to my boy Lucas and Ryan, Lucas and Ryan over at Land Parties Pod. They had me on their podcast a couple weeks ago. Fantastic podcast that interviews cool people in the game industry. After that is the Online Warriors podcast, also friends of the show, 1 day and 9 hours for them. After that, so at number 8 is Fake Doctors, Real Friends, which is a Scrubs rewatch podcast. I'm a huge Scrubs fan, and I'm way behind on the show. I haven't listened to much of anything this year. I'm like 6 months behind, but even so, I still listen to them 1 day and 9 hours worth to put them in at 8th place. At number 7 is my friends over at the Taste of Dragons podcast. They're a fantastic gaming podcast as well. Hold on. 10, 9, 8, 7. So 6 is a podcast called Tell 'em Steve Dave, which is from Kevin Smith's friends. Brian Johnson. Actually, do you know the show Impractical Jokers?
Yeah.
Brian Quinn is one of the co-hosts of it. Q is one of the co-hosts of it. 2 days and 9 hours for them. Broad Street Hockey. It's a Flyers podcast. Hockey, Philadelphia Flyers podcast. 2 days, 21 hours. Comedy Bang Bang. That's one of my favorite podcasts of all time. 3 days, 3 hours. That's at number 4. Number 3 is actually a podcast I just started listening to this year, but they release 3 episodes a week. So their numbers, even though I've only been listening to them for like maybe 4 months, they're at 3 days and 3 hours because they literally do an episode Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I hate the Friday one though because it always comes out at like 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So I'm already home from work, so I have to find a way to listen to it over the course of the weekend. Number 2 is the Completely Unnecessary podcast, which is Pat the NES Punk, another video game podcast. Pat the NES Punk and his friend Ian, they talk about like kind of retro gaming news, almost like what stuff that's happening in. It's not just like, here's the new games coming out. It's like advancements in like retro game tech, like playing, old games on modern TVs and shit, and like video game history to an extent, and covering just stuff going on, like drama in the game and in the retro game community, but not always drama. They're not a drama podcast, just to be very clear. They talk about the big stuff, but they don't go and talk about like, what's this YouTuber doing or shit like that. Number 1 with a bullet between their RSS feed and their main feed is Retronauts. That's over 7 days.
Wow.
So it jumps from 3 days to Retronauts. I listen to so much because they just are. I love retro gaming podcasts. They're a fantastic retro gaming podcast. Sometimes I feel like my show borrows a little bit too much from them, but I also do a lot of different things that they don't do. I cover modern games. I do those, like I did that first music showcase episode this year. I did an improv episode. I tried different things like that. So it's not necessarily just specific retro gaming topics, but it is a lot of retro gaming on the show. But so that's number 1 with a bullet. And what do you know? Retronauts was also number 1 last year.
I sense a theme here.
Well, it's nuts. Is then it shows your global amount of time, like between everything. I'm not going to read all of mine, but like Comedy Bang Bang is at number 3 with 17 days. That's over the last 3 years. Broad Street Hockey is at number 2 with 18 days, and then Retronauts is number 1 with 29 days.
Holy cow! So yeah, you can tell
a full month of my life has been spent listening to Retronauts,
God.
all while working or driving though. So it's not like I'm just sitting at home being like
staring at this. That's one thing that I think is so funny with podcasts that people don't understand. Like they're like, well, what do I do? I'm like, you put it on while you're doing stuff.
Do your laundry. I do it while washing. I listen to them while washing dishes sometimes.
Yeah, same here.
Or mowing the lawn.
Chores, yeah.
The summer, that's a great time. The summer, well, when my kid, the 3 months while my kid was born, the only time I could really listen to podcasts was mowing the lawn.
Yeah,
it takes a long time for me to mow the lawn, so I get a couple hours to be able to do it. So anyway, we're going at almost 2 hours, man. We have been going for a long fucking time. Do you have
what else did we expect?
I know it's two podcasters rambling about like their years, so of course it's going to go long. But what are some of your final thoughts, man? What are some final thoughts on 2021, and what do you want to accomplish in 2022?
2021, it's been an interesting year. You know, there's been a lot of great stuff that happened to me. The equipment upgrades I've had this year, I'm really looking forward to 2022 for a lot of reasons, not just to do with podcasting, but like I'm hoping, I can keep improving. I'm hoping I can keep making content that people want to check out. I hope I can keep trying out these different segments that I've done, which is something I completely forgot to mention. But, I've done these fun little segment episodes. That's something I'm going to be doing going forward because they're fun. And something I definitely want to accomplish next year is I want to do more in-person stuff. I think that it's time to start branching out to more people. One thing I want to do is I want to talk to more local businesses and stuff like that. That's something I really want to start doing to get my name out more locally here in my town, because there's no one around really doing it that I think, is doing it the proper way. So it's like, hey, let's, instead of worrying about talking to quote unquote famous people and shit like that, like, let me talk to people who, I can really connect with in person. And, I'm hoping I can have a little studio room coming up here in the next couple of months. So we'll see. But, I want to keep growing, and there's nothing really crazy that I have kind of planned heading into the year. There's a couple of projects I'm working on slowly that, might launch next year. So I'm looking forward to that, but nothing I can really say yet because it's way too early. But I'm going to keep plugging along and, just keep doing my thing. And, I always look forward to doing these with you and, getting to kind of look back on the year. It's become tradition, man. And I always look forward to it.
I know. I think one of the things that I like about this is that it's a tradition. Like we kind of have a way to, it's like I said before, it's our way to finally be able to podcast together.
Yes.
Even though it's only once a year, at least it's something better than nothing, Mm-hmm. So, for me, my only goal is just I think I said it on another episode, maybe the 200. I don't think it was on the 200th. I forget what episode I said it on, but I want kind of like what you did with your audio drama, like your horror
mm-hmm.
episode, where you read your own script and you kind of produced it like an audio drama.
Mm-hmm.
I want to do that. There's a short story that I found through a different podcast, which is another great show. It's a fantastic podcast called LeVar Burton Reads. If you loved Reading Rainbow, LeVar Burton's the host of Reading Rainbow. If you remember that show as a kid.
Right.
He reads adult science fiction, adult as in like, it's not sexual, it's not triple X like adult,
yeah.
But science fiction, and it's short fiction stories for adults, and it's really good. Obviously he's an actor, so he knows what he's doing, but it's super well produced, and it's a fantastic podcast. They're like 30 to 40 minutes a piece, and they're just excellent. And he read a story on there that is video game related, and I thought it would be perfect to do on the podcast. And I think I'm going to record it and then hopefully if I like it, then I'm going to reach out to the author and ask for permission to do it. If he says no, I know I did all that work for nothing, but it's like, I would rather do all that work for nothing than get permission from him and then never have it come out.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I
Still
just feel
do it for the challenge of it, right? That's
exactly. So it's that's what I'm challenging myself. Before the end of 2022, I need to have that episode out. And that's been hard for me because I don't know how I'm going to do it. Not in terms of like how I'm going to get it out by 2022. I just have no idea how I'm going to do the episode, period.
Yeah.
So, but that's my challenge for myself. That's what I want to do this year. So let's wrap this episode up. TJ, thank you so much for coming on the show. And of course, as usual, thank you for being a friend. Listeners,
of course, brother.
Sincerely, thank you so much for being with me this entire year. It's truly meant the world to me. And this year, like I said before, has been one of the toughest of my life, but it's been one of the most rewarding because I have found myself more productive than ever, despite having more anxiety than ever in my life. So it really, truly means a lot that you set aside time to listen to this show and you listen to my ramblings, and hopefully you enjoyed this episode. I like doing this as just kind of like a self-reflection thing. More, like I said, I hope if it comes off as any type of arrogance, just send me a DM. I promise I won't bite your head off. I'd like to. I'd be willing to take that constructive criticism. I like doing this because it's a method of self-reflection for me.
If you message Josh and say that he was self-indulgent in any way, I'll bite your head off. Don't call
he'll do
Josh. I'll drive to where you are. Listen, I'm talking. No,
you're from Canada. You'll ride a moose there.
I'm talking to you right now. Listen, you, the one who's going to message Josh and say, I thought you were a little too self-indulgent on your End of the Year Retrospective podcast. I will find you. You can't hide from me because I have moose vision or goose vision. I will find you, and I will honk you.
Well, thank you for the support, TJ.
Anytime, man.
But no, seriously, thank you all for listening. It really means the world. TJ, do you have any final words to wrap up 2021?
Just thank you so much again, my man, as always.
You freaked me out there. You completely were paused. I'm like, did I lose? Did he lose connection?
What the last like 30 seconds? What the hell knows I?
You were like a statue.
I did it for the lull. Sorry. I just want to say thank you again, man, as always, for having me on for this. It's so much fun and getting to chat with you. And I appreciate your friendship, especially now, over the last 4-5 years, whatever the hell now.
Years,
yeah,
right?
It's crazy, man. It's crazy. And congratulations for the year you've had. I know it's been a tough year for you with everything, but I mean, you've had a lot of really cool stuff happen. I can't wait to do this again next year and talk about how much growth you've had and, and some cool stuff happening for sure.
Thanks, man. Thank you. And thank you once again, listeners, for listening. TJ, where can the good people find you online?
If you go on Google and you type in The Hodder Show, I will pop up now. Facebook, Instagram, The Hodder Show. It's HODDER, The Hodder Show. Spotify is usually how I plug the show. Spotify, you can go on there. I'm doing these fun little things now where if you listen to an episode on Spotify and actually click on the description, there might be like a Q&A thing in there or like a poll or something that you like
can do that through Anchor now. Yeah.
And it's really fun. I love it. I try to be active on social media, but also the YouTube thing, and obviously Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Castbox, Podcast Addict, which is a fantastic app, which you should go check out. You guys have sponsored Still Learning Podcast. And, just keep supporting the indie podcasts of the world, man. People like myself and Josh, you've heard us talk about how much we love doing this and how much we put into it. And it means so much to us just to have even one person listen. And it makes us feel really so good. And you can be a part of our community and you can be as much really a part of this community as we are. So just thank you, everybody, for listening to this and for supporting me and for supporting Josh. And Josh, thank you so much, man, as always, for all of your support.
Of course, man. And I should have known this episode was going to be long because we're at over 2 hours. So this is going to be a bitch to edit. But no, as usual, you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at StillLoadingPod on all of them. If you want to email me, you can email me stillloadingcontact@gmail.com. If you want to support the show, give it a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts or whichever podcasting app you use, because that helps more people find the show. If you want to support it monetarily, you can go to patreon.com/stillloadingpod and get some nice benefits on top of it. For $1 a month, you'll get the episodes a couple days early, as well as at a higher bit rate. And for $5 a month, you'll get all of that. Oh, actually, sorry, at $1 a month, you get that and access to a patron exclusive Discord. At the $5 a month rate, you will get all of that, the patron exclusive Discord, the episodes early at a higher bit rate, but also 2 extra bonus episodes on a month that are released on Fridays. They're usually pretty small, like 15 minutes to maybe 40 minutes, but they do. I try to do interesting topics. I did a retro magazine review where I found an old video game magazine in my collection, and I just went through it and read some of the weird shit that they were doing on there. And then I also did an episode called, I forget what I called it, but basically it was all about how Nintendo squeezed extra power out of the NES when it wasn't designed to handle it. They added extra hardware to every single game cartridge for some games in order to get games to run on it. For example, Super Mario Bros. 3, if it wasn't for the extra processor chip they added to the Mario 3 cartridges, it would not be able to run on the original Nintendo because it was too advanced. So those chips, by adding them to every cartridge, expanded the life cycle of the NES. So stuff like that, like things that aren't quite big enough for an episode, but I still find interesting and want to cover. So
stuff that's super interesting to hear for sure.
Well, hopefully people find it interesting. I find it interesting, but patreon.com/stillloadingpod. But besides all of that, if you only have limited funds, and you're willing to part with some of it, don't give it to me. Go to the Bit by Bit Foundation. The Bit by Bit Foundation is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to put video games and video game consoles in the hands of children receiving inpatient care at hospitals. So if you want to go support them, go to bitbybitfoundation.org and consider donating. And that will do it for 2021 for the Hodder Show, for the Still Loading Podcast. I don't know why I said it's just for Still Loading Podcast. Thank you all for listening. It's been truly an honor this year. It's been one of my favorite years, despite all the stress that I mentioned before. So, TJ, thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much, man. Always fun. I appreciate you, brother.
And thank you all for listening. I will see you all in 2022.
All right, guys, there you have it. My crossover episode with Still Loading Podcast, my boy Josh. Our end of the year retrospective. Always a great time getting to chat with Josh. We always just have an absolute blasty blast. So I hope you guys did too. And I want to wish you all a very happy new year. As you guys are hearing this, if you're listening to it on the day it's released, it is actually January 31st. I've waited a day to drop this episode, so it was actually the full end of the year retrospective. So definitely a lot of fun to do that on actually the last day of the year for once. I don't think I've ever actually done it this way. But celebrate responsibly tonight, and be sure to ring in the new year in style if you are so able to. I know there's a few people who are out there, working those jobs that need to be done, man. And big kudos to you people who are out there working. My fiance is actually working tonight, so I do feel your guys' pain in a way. But she's helping to save the lives of our little furry friends. So big kudos to my wonderful fiance and everyone in the veterinarian field, and whatever field you're in, obviously our essential workers and, fast food workers, and, it goes without saying, obviously the, first responders and things of that nature. Of course, big shout out to all you guys for doing what you do. We appreciate you. And with that sentimental message, I'm going to sign off here today. Thank you so very much for all the support this year, guys. And I'll see you next time. And next year, right here on The Hodder Show. Take it easy, guys.